Hello everyone, I'm Andrew Sinclair, founder and CEO of trajectorE Engineering. It's an exciting time in our industry. The world is on a journey to transition to more renewable energy, and the need for critical minerals will be higher than ever. In this series we call trajectorE Insights, we share best practices and war stories from friends and colleagues who have a history of starting new mineral processing facilities. In this first insight, I get the opportunity to have a conversation with a former colleague of mine from the Vale days and a new colleague of mine here at trajectorE, Heiko Leers. We first met well over a decade ago when we were starting up the Long Harbor processing plant, and so we go into a little bit of detail on operational readiness, kind of at a high level across all aspects of operational readiness. But for now, I hope you enjoy a great conversation that I have with Heiko. Why don't I start by letting Heiko introduce himself?
Well, good day, everybody. Thanks. I'm Heiko, as Andrew alluded to. Basically, I have almost 30 years experience working for one of the largest mining companies in the world. I've worked different parts of the world. I've been in operations, maintenance, HR, health and safety, engineering, projects, operational readiness. So lots of broad experience. I always consider myself a generalist, and specifically today it's around the operational readiness piece, which I have a great passion for, having been both on the project side as well as on the operations side.
And I'm particularly happy, Heiko, that we get to work together again, and also we get to have this conversation because I think in the gap between when we worked together, I started referring to you as corporate Yoda because you've got so many great nuggets of wisdom. So I'm looking forward to sharing those with everybody. Today's topic is operational readiness, and we're generally going to cover kind of three main questions related to operational readiness. We'll start with why it's important. We'll get into what it is, and then some topics or discussion around how to efficiently or effectively execute operational readiness as part of your project. So if we start off with why is operational readiness important, Heiko, why is it important?
That's a great question. It's really around de-risking your ramp up. I think that'd be the simplest way to talk about it. I look at operational readiness from the operator side, the person who is going to be receiving the asset. And what's really important is that when that new project, either greenfields or brownfields, lands on your site, that you have all the connective tissue connected to that project seamlessly to minimize risk to your ramp up. So that's really what it is, to de-risk your ramp up and to make sure that you can generate your revenue as quickly as you told your investors you would.
Yeah, I think that the investor piece is important because particularly, in the critical minerals space right now, I think there's a lot of new mining companies that are coming in and they have, I'm seeing a lot more activity and investment going into new entrants, and they may not have the really, really well established, we've got multiple mining operations across the world and this is how we do it, this is how we've done it. They've got good experienced people, but maybe not the corporate systems and tools. So there can be some risk from an investor perspective when you're putting your money there. So I think definitely ensuring that you've got a good operational readiness plan can help you demonstrate to your investors that their capital is being deployed in a safe place. Because I think we've all heard of stories of whether it's a full operation or parts of operations that have struggled to reach their full potential. Not necessarily from a technical perspective because the engineering wasn't done properly, but just weren't quite ready to turn that asset on. I was actually there's a documentary on 3 Mile Island on Netflix right now, and I was taking it in there a couple of weeks ago, and sort of one of the root causes that they identified for that disaster was actually inadequate operator training. So just I think an example we can all relate to that is related to not being operationally ready. If we switch to, what the heck is operational readiness? Because it seems like every group I talk to seems to think about operational readiness in a different way and having, a different definition. So Heiko, if I throw it back to you, what's your definition of operational readiness?
It's a great question. So I agree. My experience is that many people, many organizations have different experience with operational readiness, and they'll typically work with what they know around operational readiness. And so my experience would say that it's the things that you don't know where the gold nuggets or the opportunities lie. So from an operational readiness perspective, having been an owner's rep, so let's think of it as an owner's rep. An owner's rep would be accountable to the owner, seconded to the project, and to make sure that the project would do the things that the owners wanted. And that was the genesis of operational readiness. So if you look at me as a process engineer, as the owner's rep, I'd make sure the process part was done properly on behalf of the owner. But what about the maintenance? What about the IT? What about the business systems? What about the health and safety? What about all those other systems? So you think about what operational readiness is taking all of those experiences of all those different elements, the 10 different elements, maintenance, IT, and taking all those experiences together, documenting as a best practice to make sure that when you develop your operational readiness plan, you're looking at all those different lenses through and from the operator perspective, not from the project perspective, to make sure, again, back to how we started, that when that project lands, it lands seamlessly into the operator such that you can minimize risk to your operation and generate that revenue.
And, to be honest, a lot of my personal operational readiness experiences with, large greenfield projects, but I've got experience with smaller, call it modification projects to existing, brownfield sites. And at least for those smaller projects, we didn't really do a lot in the way of operational readiness because a lot of that was covered by, say, the management of change process. So I'm just curious for your take on where does operational readiness kind of end and where does management of change in a brownfield site begin, or is it kind of the same thing?
It's a great question. So let me just take a 90-degree angle at that. The operational readiness is the foe to the project manager. They don't like operational readiness because all we do as operational readiness people is we add scope, schedule, and cost, and that's not what they're about.
No, we're not.
No, we're not. Okay, so I've been one too. And from the owner's perspective, what does the owner want? The owner wants that project to land seamlessly, and sometimes there's things that aren't in the original scope that get identified as needed to get done through the operational readiness program. So those issues have to be discussed. And so what you want to do is whatever those issues are, let's say you need a new computerized maintenance management system, which wasn't part of the original of the project you're building. You want to have those discussions at the right level of the organization between the operator or the owner and the project manager. So what operational readiness does, it makes sure that those issues that are identified through the operational readiness program get elevated and the right decisions made for the business overall, which could go in the favor of the operator or in favor of the project manager. It's not a this or that. So the key, essential, is the operational readiness lead has to be working through for the owner, not the project manager. It's like having the proverbial fox in the henhouse. And most organizations have the project manager accountable for operational readiness. And my experience is that doesn't cut it.
When we come back and talk about execution, I think we're going to dive pretty deep into that because that'll be a good conversation. Maybe I'll play the role of the project manager in that one, and we'll have a good debate. But if we go back to what operational readiness is, you mentioned 10 elements. Maybe we'll talk through them briefly and just give an overview of what they are. But first one on the list is operations. So, besides, hey, you can just add SOPs to the deliverables list. Engineering can bang those out, right? So what else is under the hood when it comes to operations from an OR perspective?
So if you think about operations, it's how you're going to run your facility. Are you running 24/7? Are you running 12-hour shifts? Are you running on weekends? Are you going to have shutdowns or turnarounds? How are you going to run your facility? What's your philosophy from an operations perspective to run that facility? Are you running it remotely? Are you going to have operators on the floor? Are you going to run it with a central control? Are you going to have it with supervisors in the field? Are you going to have high performance work systems? How are you going to operate? So the key part here, and I just want to get this is really, really important for me, is that those philosophies through all those different elements have to be defined first. So for your philosophies or your strategy around operations or maintenance or IT need to be sorted through with the senior leaders in the organization. If you do not do that, if we do not define those strategies, philosophies up front, later on, your operational readiness, you're ready to execute something, but if you don't have the strategy behind it, you're going to have to go back and do that. And my experience is that most organizations miss that part because the owner has not been involved. So anyway, what's your operating philosophy? I just told you all the different elements that you'd have to consider.
So that's interesting because, I mean, certainly it seems like you'd probably need to make a lot of those decisions. I mean, from my experience, you're generally freezing your budget and trying to freeze your scope when you are doing your feasibility study or your FEL 3 study or whatever terminology or whatever, methodology you're using. So, but I guess one of the challenges is, again, if I'm using my bias toward greenfield, how do you go about making those decisions at that stage if you don't have everybody even hired or on the team yet?
Well, let me give you a perfect example.
I'm throwing some haymakers at you here, by the way.
No, that's good. So one of the companies I worked for was doing a large mine expansion, and part of their project plan was to hire 300 people. Okay, it's great. It's a brownfield, so it's a new facility, 300 people.
Right.
And I asked during the operational readiness review, how are you doing that? Well, what do you mean, how am I doing? Well, how are you going to get 300 people? And they were in a unionized environment. They were going to post. So they're going to post 300 jobs. Okay, so let me understand this. So you have 1,500 miners currently working for you. You're going to post for 300. Where are they going to come from? What do you mean? Well, they're going to come from the other facilities. So you're going to shut those facilities down to get your 300? Oh, I didn't think of that. So that's a typical example of where a project manager wouldn't know what he doesn't know about that. He doesn't even know we have a posting process. He may not even know we're unionized. So that's the example where that strategy has to be thought up front by the senior management. Hang on a second. How are we doing that? And then you might have to get into negotiations with the union around we have to hire 300 new, or it's 1-for-1 for everyone we hire. We'll allow one posting. That's got to be thought through because you can't shut everybody else down. So that's a real life example where those strategies have to be defined and developed up front.
Yeah, it sounds like you definitely need to have the right perspective around the table early in the project to avoid, again, if I put my project manager hat on, avoid all that scope creep at the end, right? If only all these decisions could be made early. Speaking of people.
Sorry, Andrew, and no disrespect to you as a project manager, I wouldn't expect you to know that.
Right.
And so you don't have to feel guilty for knowing it. I'm just saying get the right people in the room, which is the owner, to make sure those discussions are led. And my point would be, as opposed to tomorrow you turn on the switch to operate, you put those postings out, let's find out what the issues are earlier on. Everybody knows the benefit of identifying problems earlier have a huge difference or reduction on the impact of the overall cost of the project.
Absolutely. You mentioned people. If you need to hire 300 people, that seems, sure. You can just put together a couple of job descriptions, post them, and you just hire people, right? And that's it. So what else goes into the people dimension of operational readiness?
That's a great question. So people dimension is, I'd say, one of the critical dimensions. And typically, so I'll talk as an owner, as a general manager of a facility I ran with 1,200 people. When you bring those facilities on, ideally, you want to have your operators working through commissioning and startup all the way through, right? So if they're working on
great training opportunity.
Great training, because that's the only time you'll see the condition of a plant in that when it's empty. You may never see it again. So having your operators out there to see that is great experience. So that involves what? you got to bring those people on earlier. So typically, if you bring people on earlier, that's cost. So a project manager will typically say they're going to start on day X when it's actually day minus 90 where you have to bring those people on. So are those costs considered in the project? Likely not, because they don't worry about it. But as an owner, I want to make sure all of my operators, or as many as they can be, have gone through startup and commissioning, and then they turn over to operate the facility. So that's a critical path item is how you're going to operate and commission your facility with your operators as much as you can.
It's a buzzword. Use the word sustainability. You can use it safety, health, environment. But what from a sustainability perspective, what are some of the things that need to be considered as part of the operational readiness program?
Great question. So one of the things, if you look at the safety, health, and environment lens, and I'll go back, you need to develop your strategy, right? So how are you going to operate your facility? Are you doing no emissions? Are you going to do work with greenhouse credits, CO2 credits? How are you going to operate your facility? You're going to recycle everything? What's your philosophy? Are you going to just run like you've always run on your other facilities? Are you going to go to landfill sites? What's your philosophy on impacting on the environment? Same thing with your health and safety. That we have no harm to our employees. How are you going to do that? So you need to get your strategy up front thought through, because that has a big impact on how you're going to run a facility. Another big part is all the permitting pieces, right? What permitting do you need? Are there any First Nations considerations you need to deal with as well? So thinking those things through, and they can add a lot of time and schedule. And then you'll find out pretty quickly is the knowledge and skills to develop and to manage those activities requires someone with a certain skill set. Right. And so you'll find pretty quickly that you may not have that person on your team. You may have to lean on the operation. So as opposed to you're 3/4 of the way through your feasibility or detail engineering, you realize I got a permitting issue. It's a little late.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting you say net zero or emissions reduction. That's the thing that I think is the great trend in the market now is, for a long time, I think environmental performance was really I'm an electrical engineer, a Boolean, a binary, 1 or 0. Either we're meeting the requirements of our permit and regulations or we're not. And if we are, we're good. Whereas I think what's awesome now is that we're seeing, the Teslas of the world putting market pressure on operators to reduce their emissions in order to, be more marketable. So if you can sell your product, you can sell more of your product because it is cleaner, a cleaner mineral, then, I just think that's a great trend that we're seeing in the market now. But you mentioned management. So again, from an operational readiness perspective, the next element we have on the list is management. What are some of the things to consider from a management perspective to get ready to operate a facility?
Hey, I got two pieces there. I just want to refer to one thing that I think I might not have been clear on. When the operational readiness work is, the first piece is we talked about these strategies, and we're going through those right now. And the strategies have to be developed with the owners and the senior operators of the organization. Many of the companies I've seen with don't do that. But after that strategy, I think we've talked about, you can get yourself in trouble. The second part of the operational readiness is really doing the plans, the detailed plans that have to be done to deliver on that strategy. And the third part about operational readiness is actually doing the plan, executing the plan. We talk about management. That's a great one. So from a management perspective, this has nothing to do with the project manager. This is around from an operations perspective. What is management do you want to see? Great. So I'm going to want metrics, right? And so metrics have to be appropriate to the level where the person can control them, right? So it's a measure that the person can control. So what metrics do you need at each level of the organization? How will you get those metrics? How will you measure those? What management routines do you need to put in place? So that has to be thought through from a design perspective to make sure that if you do your maintenance management system or your business system, let's say, whatever enterprise system, those have to be designed and configured to deliver the metrics at the appropriate level and to make sure those management routines are going. So it's thinking of the beginning with the end in mind. It's got to be thought through. all of a sudden you say, well, I don't even have that measure. I don't even have that metric. And then need to be integrated back into the, your environmental reporting, accounting reporting. All that has to be thought through from a management system perspective in an integrated way.
Yeah, that makes sense, because certainly operational management and project management are two different beasts and different set of metrics. So you definitely need the right perspective to do that. From a maintenance perspective, I got to say, in terms of the definition, we talked about different definitions of operational readiness. I definitely see a much wider recognized need for setting up a maintenance program for the assets and whatnot, and that's generally a little better understood than some of the other elements. But again, from a maintenance perspective, coming out of the gate, what what do you need to consider as part of your OR program for maintenance?
Good question. So my experience is that many organizations would see that maintenance is the main part of operational readiness. Okay, that's just the big thing. And the reality, it is the big thing, and it's not the only one, as we've talked about. So the setting up of your maintenance computerized system is essential. So first question you got to have, how am I going to control, manage, identify all of my assets? So one of the things you want to really watch out for is that if you are going to an engineering contractor who's going to start numbering your equipment and numbering your pumps, is that consistent with how you run your business? Or are you going to have a whole new numbering system? So you need to sort that through, because I'll tell you, all of a sudden getting your hand over manuals, everything's numbered differently. Go put this into your enterprise system. That can be a nightmare. So again,
Seen that.
Sure. So the first thing is, what's your computerized management maintenance system? That's a strategy you got to think through. If you don't have one, you got to figure out what you want to do. You don't have to be complicated. Then the next thing is, what are the attributes in that system that you need to declare to your engineering people, your design engineers, to make sure they build it so it fits with the system that you have or the system that you want. That's the second piece. So it's all your equipment numbering and all those things. And the next part around the maintenance strategy is, what is your maintenance strategy? Are you running 4 days a week? Are you going to have duty standby pumps? Are you running your equipment to failure? Are you going to have condition-based monitoring? Are you going to have predictive monitoring where there's a vibration sensor that, based on vibration on analytics, says I got to create a work order, and it creates the work order automatically, so you don't have to have an operator go or a mechanic go by there once a shift to look at those on their routines. That all has to be thought through. How do you want to run your facility? So very, very critical. And I can tell you one thing, Andrew, is that if the maintenance part, you can really add additional cost at the end of the line if you do not think that through from the beginning.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll tell you, one of the things that so not being an expert in maintenance, but having, I'd say over the last 10 years, really learned a lot from a lot of really smart people. What you just described generally covers, level one in the reliability pyramid. And if people get ahead of themselves and try to think about how far they can get up that pyramid, it may not be until year 5 or whatnot that you get to level 3 or what have you. But if you try to do too much too soon without having the foundation of level 1 in place first, you can really shoot yourself in the foot. So, I think I've seen that a couple of times, and definitely have a much better appreciation for how important good maintenance is. So,
if you're allowed, just one other part that's really important. When you spawn the bottom of the maintenance triangle, I was a maintenance reliability guy, so that popped some ideas in my head. So I just want to share those quickly. Really is, and this links back to the HR side of things, right? Mm-hmm. So how you're going to operate your facility. So if you're going to run with frontline mechanics to fix things, then who's doing the second order maintenance stuff? Those are engine rebuilds, pump rebuilds. Are you doing that in-house, out, or out? Right. Are you contracting that in or contracting that out? That all has to be thought through from the beginning. And part of it is, if you can readily buy a service with competition in town, you may want to contract that out. If it's a maintenance that's unique to your equipment only, you may want to contract that in. You want to have that knowledge and skills inside. Right. So you have to think that through as well. And then from the maintenance side, is I would expect that you want to know, how do you identify work? It has to be thought through. Like, is it maintenance, operations, third part, or CMMS? Then how do you approve that work? That's got to be thought through. How do you approve what level work? Then how do you plan? So planning the work in terms of putting those job procedures or the bill of materials. How do you schedule that work, right? And then how do you execute that work? That all has to be thought through in terms of how you want to operate. That goes back to your strategy, or you contracting thing out.
Makes sense. And you know what? And that's a great segue. Because you talked about contracting strategy. Obviously, a big part of maintenance is also how are you going to manage spares and whatnot. So supply chain is the next element on the OR list that we were going to talk about. So, what are some of those things that need to be thought through from a supply chain perspective for OR?
So supply chain, it's really, from the ideal is just in time. You want to have things there, right? Thinking things through, and then so just give you an example that you don't want to have all this inventory in place. If for example you decide to go with a duty standby operation, so just think about that, and you need spare pump parts, right? Really, you don't need those parts for the pump that's failed until you know the one you put on service is going to fail next, right? So if you think things through, you can make sure you have, I'll call it requisite inventory. Requisite is the appropriate level of time to minimize risk, right? And you need to go through that, and ties back into your operating strategy, into your maintenance strategy. So for example, if you have a turnaround once a year of three weeks, maybe you don't need to bring those supplies in until just before you run. Ties back to your strategy, how you're going to operate, how you maintain your facility. And then ultimately, you have to go through a risk analysis from your critical spares perspective. You talked about that, but critical inventory, reagents, those kind of things. Your solvents or whatever else you need, your explosives for an underground. You need to think that through of how you're going to maintain that. Then you go talk about the next question: are you doing centralized warehouse? Are you doing localized warehouse? Or are you doing a combination of that to make sure that the person can get the right material at the right time to execute the right piece of work the right way? That's what they need to do.
That makes a lot of sense. And certainly, that inventory piece resonates with me, because if you can minimize or optimize your inventory, I think you'd be trading off operational risk, downtime risk, versus how much cash do you want to tie up in inventory just sitting there, So definitely some pretty high level strategies need to be defined there.
Sorry, Andrew. And the one part is that as a project manager, having been there, and you have a budget for capital spares. That's the first budget that gets cut. because I don't need capital spares to hand it over.
Right.
I have to have the plant running. So the fight over capital spares, the project manager does not have the authority to cut capital spares unless the operator is involved. Has to be.
Yeah, and that's definitely got to be set up from a governance perspective. So the next one on the list is quality. So, there can be varying, depending on what kind of operation you have, there can be very varying quality requirements. How do you go about figuring out your quality needs, your quality strategy for operational readiness?
Great question. I implemented a quality ISO 9000 system, and I was an auditor.
Oh, we don't have to do ISO every time, do we?
No. So really, so from a business perspective, if getting a certification adds value to your bottom line, then your marketing people should tell you that. If I get an ISO certification, if that adds an extra $10 per widget or $10 a pound, then that's something to consider, right? And there's a cost to maintain that. That's the one quality aspect. The other quality aspects, you may need to have certain pieces around your lab. For example, is your lab certified? Do you need to have it certified? So there's all those quality aspects on that end. And then on the other end, that's going out. What about coming in? What quality assurances do you need from your suppliers? Not just from the project. The project has to have quality assurance for sure, in terms of making sure that the pumps turn the right way and you do site visits. But this is from the operations perspective. Your reagents coming in, how do you make sure that the quality, is of what you need, and not adding quality for the sake of for no reason. It's got to make business sense to add that quality.
Yeah. What's the risk, right? If I get off spec sulfuric acid, how bad can that be, and so on. So yeah, it makes sense. This next one, I might have to help you out a little bit with. It's digitization. So I'm loving the look on your face right now. So I might help you out a little bit, but if I get you started, what are some of the considerations you might want to make with your digitization strategy for operational readiness? Fancy, one of those fancy buzzwords that gets thrown around, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm going to show my age here, right? So I was pretty cool when we put PLC, I think PLC 6s in or 4s, and they had a 0.20 milliamp output and all those kind of things. So it's really, how do you want to control your operations, right? All the digitization that you need to have. Are you running with laptops? Are you having field laptops that people are running around in the plant with? How is that going back to a central DCS? All those things. So I just know that, and the other part that's really important is, I learned this the hard way, is we pick something and it's no longer supported 5 years down the road. And then that causes a whole bunch of turnover issues and that kind of thing. So on the one side, getting a big centralized system, there's benefits of that, but you have plug and play. And I would refer to somebody like you to give me the different pieces, well, but really go back to the operations. What do you want? What do you want to run?
Yeah, I agree. And you know, as I guess I'll call myself a technology guy. It really starts with, what's the business need? What's the problem you're trying to solve? Because if you let us technology folks go, we'll automate the crap out of everything because it's fun to implement those types of systems. But it's really got to be, what's the business need? And you know, for me, automation at a process level in particular, and I guess, you know, even at a business level, it's really about, you know, what's the risk? Is variability going to be a risk? And a lot of times, you know, our focus around automation is first step is really achieving consistent performance and not variability in your performance. And then once you achieve consistency, then you're looking at improved performance. But for me, you know, at this stage, really what you'd want to do is, at a high level, decide, okay, what are the business functions that we want to have a technology component? And typically that is, as we talked about, you know, process automation. What level of automation do you want to have in the facility? Business automation. So from a CMMS perspective, that could help, you know, determine the level of complexity there. It could certainly have impacts. And as you talked about earlier, having run hours from the process automation system automatically trigger work order. Do you want to do that? That kind of and that may not be something you do out of the gate. It might be something you do as sort of a step 2. But then around all the other business systems, from a financial perspective, from an HSE perspective, and so on, it's really important to define what you need. And then there's so much off the shelf available. Typically, you shouldn't get into too much custom configuration, except making sure all the systems talk to one another. And then the last point that I'll add, which is becoming ever more important now, is making sure you take the right steps from a cybersecurity perspective, because I think, you know, everyone has seen enough news stories of large organizations getting hacked. The worst case scenario is, of course, someone taking control of a process automation system. Certainly having the right layers of protection between the internet and your process automation system is important.
Said that. For me, is the idea of visual management. I love the idea of a control chart where the operator adds a point every day out in the field, right? So
there's a level of ownership that technology doesn't help you with there.
Right. It can get the operator away from doing those circuits. So having visual management, having, you know, a pressure gauge where the green is the right area, and that operator looks at every shift. So you need to think that through, because you can lose the connectivity that you want to have the operator for have the feel of the plant.
Totally. The last 2 elements really are where we start to connect, I guess, what you'd call it, the traditional project with operational readiness. The first one is commissioning. And so that is very much, for me, commissioning is the point in time where, you know, the project and the operations groups are forced to work together. Hopefully there's a good working relationship across all all the departments all the way through, but there's definitely a higher level of integration required at that stage. So in terms of the things you want to think through around commissioning and commission plans, what are some of the things you need to think about?
Great question, right? So my experience is that the project manager wants the commissioning to be as short as possible, and the operations want commissioning to be as thorough as possible. Didn't
Good
say
word.
long.
Thorough. Good word.
Thorough. So our definition of thoroughness is something to look at. My experience, Andrew, is that the key for the commissioning is, so whether you have mechanical completion, water, pre-startup, startup, hot commissioning, cold commissioning, there's many different phases to go through. And it doesn't matter what you call them, as long as whatever you call them, you have alignment between the project manager and the owner on what those are, what are the different stages, and then what are the fences in between, what are the handover, the conditions of satisfaction going from one to the next. That's got to be clear. My experience, I've seen all sorts of different names and things.
Yeah.
But the alignment between the project manager and the owner to make sure we're clear on all those things, the handover is critical. Then the other key part for me would be then how do you optimize? So as an operator, I'd want to have my operators in their mechanics as soon as possible.
Right.
That adds scope and cost to the project manager. So how do you do that? And neither one of those can make that decision on their own. Typically, it might have to go to the crossover manager to solve those things. So just planning it out well and then executing the plan.
And then the last item is really around operational readiness project management. And you know what? I think I'm going to use this because it's not necessarily a piece of content in and of itself. I mean, of course, the work needs to get planned and executed and managed to completion. But I think I'll use this as an opportunity to shift us into how to execute into the sort of third part of the discussion, because to me that this is integral to that. What are some of the things to consider, Heiko, in how to effectively execute? So it's good to talk about. These are all the questions that you got to ask. You ask the questions. Presumably, there's a decision of some sort that's made. Great. Now what? How do you execute all this to make sure that ultimately you achieve that purpose of de-risking ramp up? What are some of the considerations there?
3 things, Andrew. 3 things. Okay.
Is this where we're getting a fight? I'm going to play the role of the project manager.
Yeah, no. 3 things. First is you have to have an operational readiness lead, okay, that has a good program and working through for the operations. That's the first thing, okay, accountable through the operations. The second thing is you need to have all of the operational activities that you've identified through your workshop on the main project schedule. So it's one overall integrated project schedule where the OR activities are identified on there, okay? Project manager won't like that because you're adding complexity and confusion, and it's non-linear, and what are you doing, and all those things. And the third thing is you need management routines to monitor and then make decisions on which way you're going to go on certain critical issues, which the project manager can't make on his own, and or the operations lead can't make on their own, might have to go to a higher level. So you have to have a routine to resolve those issues in a way that's best for the business, not best for the project. The project's part of the business, and the operations is part of the business. So not best for operations of the project, it's best for the business.
Yeah, I agree, and it is putting everything on the one schedule. I think we talked about this yesterday. I couldn't agree more. And at the same time, I see challenges with that. Right, as a project manager, I like things that are linear. You know what I mean? We're going to engineer stuff, and we're going to do our calculations, and then our drawings, and then we're going to do our specs, and then we're going to buy the equipment, and then we're going to install it, and then we're going to turn it on, and magically we're done. Great. That's a very linear process. I can put that on a Gantt chart really easily. I don't want to minimize it. It's a challenging, complex process to do that. But at a high level, that's a pretty linear process. You use the word nonlinear, and as a PMP guy, I think back to the toolbox, right? You use the right tool for the job. It strikes me that if we got to do a little bit of work to make some decisions and define a strategy, and then based on those decisions and strategy, then that's going to define how much work and what that work is that comes in the next phase. It's really hard to put that on a Gantt chart and use a waterfall methodology. So if I play the role of project manager here, the agile methodology is probably a little better for that, where you're taking sprints and okay, in the next sprint we need to make the following decisions, and then we can define what's the scope of the next sprint. There's a natural tension, right, between the linear project management methodology, the team that's building the plant, and that methodology that I just described. So I can see there being challenges, and I don't have a magic bullet besides the fact that there's got to be, I guess, open dialogue and communication and a mechanism to be able to resolve those types of challenges. But you've used the word constructive tension before. Maybe let's talk a little bit about that around, why can't we all just happily do our own thing? And I'm really good at this piece of this piece of the pie. Why can't I just keep my head down, do my piece of the pie, and then I'll be done, and we'll go on our merry ways?
So the constructive tension is by design. It's intentional. We want that. Operational readiness adds complexity, necessary complexity, to reduce the risk. So all I'm saying is that decisions have to be made around what we're going to do around capital spares or the CMMS. And I'm just saying that neither the operator or the owner of the plant or the project manager has that decision to make on their own. And so the project manager, who's looking after safety, quality, scope, schedule, and cost in that order for their project, all you're adding, Mr. Operational Readiness guy, is complexity to me. Right, exactly. And we want that issues identified early in the process, as early as we can, to make sure that if we're going to have to hire people a different way or 300 people, HR needs a year heads up.
Well, yeah, because as a project manager, your budget and ideally scope gets fixed at the toll gate, right? At the like I said, the FEL3, the feasibility study, or whatever terminology or whatever methodology you use. So certainly, if I bring it back to close out, if I bring it back to our earlier discussion, certainly making those strategy level decisions as early as possible, ideally before that final toll gate, before the project is sanctioned, can really reduce some of that tension. Again, we're not saying you want to remove tension altogether, but can remove some of the risk to cost, schedule, and quality if those decisions are made in advance. So, Heiko, I think this was a great conversation. Thanks for sharing some of your insights. I think this was a great insight to kick off this series, and looking forward to sharing more of this. And so, yeah, thanks. Talk to everybody soon.